On today's edition of the show, it is finally game day after 2 days off for the Florida Panthers, and it is do or die for this Cats team. Win, and you come back to FLA Live Arena for game 6, lose, your season's over. Everything's on the line tonight for the Florida Panthers. We're going to discuss that more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, April 26th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And a special shout out to the everydayers who come here to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast to get your Panthers fix each and every day. You can follow the podcast and subscribe on whichever podcast app you listen to and on YouTube. So the Florida Panthers, they tonight's game 5, down 3-1. It's pressured situation that the Florida Panthers are in. We've said never say die for this Florida Panthers team this season, but they are starting to finally run out of lives and kind of see that it's somewhat towards the end, but as getting towards that end, the Florida Panthers, of course, are gonna need everything to go their way on Wednesday night in order to extend their season past Wednesday. And it is a Winans Wednesday edition of the show, which means Jacob Winans is back for another edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Jacob, welcome back to Locked On Panthers.
Hey man, thank you for having me as usual. Obviously we wish we were in a better position previewing this game for later tonight, but this is where these are the cards that the Panthers were dealt, and I'm sure we'll get into some reasons that we have to look forward to this game still. Some couple of little signs for optimism that we can pull from, and that's pretty much what I'm sure we're going to get into. But I'll say this: 8 seed against the 1 seed, it's not impossible. Even though they're down, the chips are against them. If you can see this, I'm wearing my Miami Heat hat right now. Miami Heat are giving us an example of what an 8 seed can do against a 1 seed. And if the Panthers are watching, there's definitely hope right in our backyard. So,
yep. And Jimmy Butler being the Matthew Tkachuk of the Miami Heat. And I could say that Barkov is kind of the Bam of the Florida Panthers. Of course, the homegrown player, the guy drafted with the team and needing to, of course, bring that extra juice in order to help the Panthers extend it. But we'll get more into Barkov specifically a little later. Before we continue the show, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $20 off your first purchase at Game Time. So, Jacob, on Tuesday, the Florida Panthers announced that Lucas Carlson has been loaned back to Charlotte so that they can start preparing for their second round matchup against the Hershey Bears. And also Merrick Alsher, who signed his 3-year ELC, which won't kick in until next season. He signed an amateur tryout with the Charlotte Checkers. So great for the former third-round pick defenseman to get some time in the AHL with the Checkers. And, of course, Skylar Brindamore has signed a 2-year AHL contract with the Checkers. So nothing under the Florida Panthers as far as that. So 2 Brindamores are going to be spending multiple years in Carolina. That's for sure. One a coach, of course, one a player. But as far as the Panthers news on their front, Ekblad and Duclair were back on the ice, and Paul Maurice said they were good to go. But also missing from practice today at FLA Live Arena before they boarded the plane to Boston was both Ryan Lomberg and Sam Bennett. And this is, of course, the continued messaging that Paul Maurice sends out about injuries. And of course, we got to expect it now these days. He said one of them will go, the other one's a game time decision, and we don't know who. We have zero idea of which one it is, which is the tough part of forecasting what's going to come up in Game 5. And of course, no goalie announcement until probably until game time is what I'm going to guess as well. And Matthew Tkachuk being fined after everything that happened towards the end of the first period on Sunday, and of course nothing from Nosek from Game 2, and of course Zacha going up top on Lomberg in Game 4. But tricky situation, Jacob. And if it is Sam Bennett that is the one that can't go for the Panthers, it's going to spell some big trouble coming to Game 5.
Yeah, if Sam Bennett's unable to go, I think that you can pretty much wrap it up. He's been a game changer since he's been back in the lineup. Playoff Sam Bennett is a real thing. He kicks it into another gear in the playoffs like no one else on the team. And if he's missing, especially coupling that with Boston presumably getting Patrice Bergeron back and possibly David Krejci back as well. If Boston's adding a first and second line center back to the lineup, and we're losing our second line center, who's played more like a first line center than our first line center, we're in some big trouble. So you have to hope that he's able to go. And even so, even if he is the one that's a game time decision, that does not necessarily mean he's out. We very well could see Lomberg and Bennett both play. But if the track record holds where it's Paul Maurice says game time decision, typically our game time decisions are guys who don't play. So you have to hope that it's a situation where Benny can play. Lomberg would be a big loss too if he's not able to go. Personally, without trying to speculate too much, I feel like the game time decision might be Lomberg because he's really taken a beating the past couple of games. Would not shock me if he's dealing with something right now, but the Panthers are banged up, man. And this is a team that didn't have a whole lot of depth coming into this just due to salary cap reasons. And then playing basically playoff hockey for the last month and a half, it wears on you. And we got guys going in and out of the lineup. Duclair is still not 100%. He felt pain in warmups last game, wasn't able to go. And then Aaron Ekblad, personally, I'm not even sure how I feel about him even playing in this game because that injury, it appeared to be a head injury. We don't want to speculate. We hope it's definitely upper body. You hope it's something not head related, but all indications were that it was a head injury, which if it was, and Aaron Ekblad may have suffered his fourth career concussion, coming back in this early is a very, very dangerous and ill-advised idea if it was a concussion. So, yeah, I'm kind of on pins and needles about the guys who could miss the game, but also the guys who are playing in the game. You hope no one gets further injured in an effort like this right now, where we long-term health, long-term stability, and just quality of life in general. I mean, those things should take priority, and I hope the Panthers medical staff is doing right by the guys, not throwing them into an unsafe situation.
Yeah, and another example with on the other side of the playoff map is what happened with Jared McCann, former Panther, last night with the Avs and Kraken series. Puck was way away from the play, and then Cale Makar goes up to Jared McCann thinking that the puck was there, and Jared McCann's out for the game. He's probably out for the series, and Makar's given a 1-game suspension for Colorado. So just head injuries are just a tough place to not only evaluate, but you also got to crack down when it's necessary when it comes to those kind of injuries, and just got to continue to get it right. But you were talking about the depth for the Panthers and everything in relation to that, and that's where we're gonna transition to segment number 2. We're gonna talk about the Boston Bruins and their ability to build that championship team, and how the Panthers can hopefully reflect that in the coming seasons. We're going to discuss that next year on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about Game Time. And buying tickets to your favorite event shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easiest way to buy tickets to all sports, music, comedy, theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets, their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, hockey, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Game Time guarantees means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% for the difference. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly when you arrive. Download the Game Time app and create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Segment number 2 here on this Wednesday, April 26th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. It is another edition of Winans Wednesday here on the show. And Jacob, just talking about all the lack of depth that the Florida Panthers do have and just how a championship team is built as far as the Boston Bruins. I mean, when I look more at how they're built and just five players that they have from their roster are first-round picks that were actually homegrown that are still around. Bergeron and Marchand are not first-round picks. Bergeron was a second-round pick back in 2003. Marchand in a third-rounder in 2004. And also the other first-round picks that they've had who came from other teams, Hampus Lindholm, Taylor Hall, Forbort, Saka, Nick Foligno, and all. So just using players that have been in different situations and bringing them here as sometimes you have a situation where you don't fit a team's timeline as far as winning. For example, Linus Hallmark could have signed a long-term deal with Buffalo a few years ago, but he didn't fit their rebuild timeline. Anaheim was going through their through a transition. Had to ship out Hampus Lindholm, and look what's look what's happening now in these playoffs for the Boston Bruins. Taylor Hall was an acquisition 3 deadlines ago, but of course, signing with Buffalo on a 1-year deal, no move clause, used it to his advantage to get to Boston. He's the leading point scorer. Tyler Bertuzzi, who's going to be a UFA this offseason, a trade deadline acquisition from this year, and Dmitry Orlov, he's third in points for the Bruins in this playoffs too. And just the ability to build off everything from the guys who have been there for a while. I mean, this is a team that's consistently in the dance. They've won President's trophies. They've gone to the Stanley Cup final 3 years ago, but also what they did as far as this what feels like a last dance, because the Bruins are going to go through some cap penalties next season based on bonuses to Bergeron and Krejci because of how they used LTIR as well. So they're going to face some cap penalties. Taylor Hall did talk about that this is his best chance to win a cup as well a few days ago. And just how they were able to put this together. I mean, money spent on the decor. $30 million that they have committed to their decor. The Panthers have $19 million. But of course, one thing that's holding them back is not only buyout money, but it's goalie money too. Look at what Linus Hallmark's making. Just $5 million. Jeremy Swayman is going to be an RFA this year. Even with paying Jeremy Swayman, you're not going to get past a combined AAV of what Knight and Bobrovsky make come next year, neither. So, and of course, Patrice Bergeron, of course, didn't really average a point per game in the playoffs until 2018, but the expectation of him and Barkov were 2 different ones because of Barkov being second overall, and Bergeron's been through 3 coaches. Barkov has been through 4, and his best performance as far as points came under Joe Quenneville. Make of that what you will. Make of it what you will there. And just what I'm getting at is the ability also to continuously pivot too through different situations. Of course, we're going to see that this summer, and chances are there's going to be a forward that's going to be moved. Chances are. I think there's more of a chance that Sam Bennett stays now after seeing what we've seen towards the end of the season and in these playoffs. But someone's going to get moved, and you still have an ability over and over again to pivot. And of course, these 4 years of making the dance, the Panthers, this was their gap year. And it could be the Bruins next year that it could be their gap year too after winning the President's Trophy this season. So it just goes to show the building of it, the going for it, and what happens when you don't win too. But then what could happen as far as a bounce back as well in coming years as well.
I agree. You touched on a lot there, and I think all of it is pretty relevant when we're watching this series, because you can watch this series and have a lot of hope for what's coming, but you can also watch this series and you can be a little bit frustrated and a little bit disappointed in some of our complacency, and I think both things can be true at the same time. Reasons for frustration, we're in year 4 now, making it to the playoffs 4 in a row. We've won 1 playoff series in that time.
Mm-hmm.
And unless they pull off a somewhat miraculous 3 games in a row against the best team in the history of hockey, we're looking at 4 years in a row with a combined 1 playoff series win. There's no one in the Panthers organization that's satisfied with that.
No.
Prior to those 4 years, we had missed the playoffs a bunch. We weren't a consistent playoff team. We were constantly on the fringe and missing out late in seasons, falling apart or starting slow and not being able to make up ground. We're now a consistent playoff team, which is a great step in the right direction. No one's discrediting that, but you're looking for more. 1 playoff series win in 4 years, it's just not going to get it done. And there's going to be, this is a front office. This is an ownership group. This is a leadership core that expects more than that. They're investing a lot in this team financially and with draft capital and putting all their chips in on making this a long-term consistent contender, and the pieces are there. But you're just looking for more, and I think it starts with the core of the team, because the core of the team, there's really not a ton of room for change. With Barkov, Tkachuk, Ekblad as your real core 3 players, you think hopefully Montour gets paid and becomes a part of that core. And there's a couple of guys who, like a Carter Verhaeghe, that you feel like, okay, they've cemented their status as part of as core players. But those are the guys that are going to be here. And each year you're trying to surround them with the right supporting cast. This year, the supporting cast, it just wasn't up to what we were used to just because of salary cap reasons. And that's why we're calling this a gap year. But in a gap year, you need your core players, your leadership group, to step up and really make up that slack come playoff time. Matthew Tkachuk has done that all season.
Yes.
And when we get to the playoffs, what you're really looking for that we're not getting now 2 years in a row is the leadership group to step up and be the difference maker. The guys like Barkov, Ekblad, some of these guys have to put it together come postseason time, or else the ceiling is going to be wherever they can take this team. And if they can't take this team farther than 1 playoff series win in 4 years, there's not a whole lot you can ask from the front office as far as building this team. You can only go as far as your leadership will carry you. And I think that's what's been Boston's biggest strength. Guys like Bergeron, Marchand, even younger up and coming guys like McAvoy, they've made deep runs in the playoffs because those guys are always going to be doing their job. They're always consistent. They're always difference makers. And then Boston has surrounded them with different supporting casts over the years that have helped take them deep into the playoffs. But at the end of the day, it comes down to those core players leading. Pasternak, Marchand, these are guys on the score sheet every game. They've killed the Panthers this series. They've outplayed our core, and that's where you can get a little bit frustrated. But reasons for hope, like you said, this is a gap year. This is not a year where the Panthers have been able to go all in for salary cap reasons and draft capital reasons. I love that you led off the show talking about some of our young guys who are getting a shot in Charlotte, because at the end of the day, those are the guys who are going to fill in those depth roles, or those are the guys that are going to be the trade pieces to get players to fill in those depth roles. So it's good to see them breaking in. But yeah, if you look at Boston, that's a team that's well constructed. They've made some really timely, calculated moves, and that's a team that's not afraid to take risks either, because they, like you said, they've got some big cap penalties coming next year. They know they're not going to be able to keep this team together. There's going to be several guys leaving after this season, but when you get a shot and your core is aging and they're coming to the end of their careers, you have to take it. And they're taking their best shot this year. And unfortunately, we have been on the receiving end of that so far in this first round.
Yeah, and you just think about what Boston has done as far as like also trading for someone and then keeping them around, like a Charlie Coyle as well. That's just one example of,
and a Hampus Lindholm, who they signed long term as well.
Yeah, that's another. And that's what I'm thinking, that Bill Zito is going to go as far as a route there, especially if it helps Gus Forsling goes back to the second pair and find a friend for Aaron Ekblad on that top pair. And I think the top four can, be a little bit more solidified, especially if we're expecting Ekblad to have a better 2023-2024 season, especially on that front as well. So it just, and also it can, even though Boston's a rival, we could appreciate how well a team is built. I mean, even goal save is, when it comes to goal save above expected, Lyon is 13th of all goalies in the playoffs. Bob is 18th. Linus Ullmark is second. You know what's 22nd, Jacob? Andre Vasilevsky.
Wow.
Yeah, not a good not a good first round for Vasilevsky, and
that's a tough team, a tough matchup for him. That's a team with a ton of firepower, but you kind of wonder if the years of playoffs are starting to wear on them. They've played a lot of extra hockey, so
yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, I just hope we're in a position to capitalize when some of these teams start to hit their downward trend, because Boston is definitely not going to repeat this, and Tampa seems to be on their way down. It's about positioning yourself to be ready to take over when some of these mainstays start to hit their decline. The Panthers need to make sure their timeline lines up with those teams declining. And like you said, we got to get our goalie cap number down substantially if we're going to do that.
No doubt. And I have the perfect GIF on Twitter waiting for if the Maple Leafs do beat the Lightning, but I'll save that for when it happens.
It is Toronto. That is a big if.
Yes, correct. Thank you for reminding me. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to talk more about Game 5 coming up on Wednesday night as the Florida Panthers prepare to save their season. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Third and final segment here on this Wednesday, April 26th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. It is another edition of Winans Wednesday. And Jacob, assuming that the Edmonton Oilers end up winning their game against the Los Angeles Kings, right before we were recording, the Edmonton Oilers made it 4-2, and Jonas Korpisalo was pulled in order for in place for Phoenix Copley, and the Edmonton Oilers did score another goal. So it's second intermission right now of that game, 5-2, and the road teams are 21-12. That's the official tally as of this moment in time, assuming that result holds in Edmonton tonight. And just seeing the Carolina and New York Islanders game and seeing how New York's backs were up against the wall. And, of course, Carolina had a lot of giveaways. There was also a goal that was deflected off of Sebastian Aho's mouth and in. He was bleeding. And actually, there was also a point where both were 4-on-4, and both Sebastian Ahos were in the box. So crazy to think. But confidence level, Jacob, what is your confidence level going into Game 5 of this series, where the Panthers, they just need a win to at least bring it back home?
Well, there's a couple variables for me, and I know when we texted much earlier in the day about this segment, I told you my confidence level was at a whopping 0. If Sam Bennett misses the game, I think it stays right around a 0. But for me, the more I was thinking about it, and just maybe this is just being overly hopeful because I don't want Panthers hockey to end, I think my confidence level is up to maybe a 10 or 15 out of 100 right now. Not very high still, but there's a couple of reasons why I say that. One, something tells me that we're going to go back to Alex Lyon, just because if we're going to go down, we're going to go down swinging, and it's only right that we go down with the guy who got us here. No disrespect to Bob, it was an impossible situation he was put in after missing basically a month of hockey, and he's asked to come in and play mid-playoff series cold. He had a bad game, and no one could have expected or demanded a great performance from Bob in the situation he was put in. But I think you have to go back to the guy who got you here. Win or lose, you got to do it with Alex Lyon, because you're not in the playoffs without him. I think Alex Lyon going back in the net, I feel like maybe he has a chance to recapture the magic that got on there, and that gives me a little bit of hope. Another reason why I'm somewhat hopeful here, the Panthers have been playing backs against their wall hockey, must-win hockey. They've had probably 10, 15, maybe even 20 games so far this year that they had to win, or else their playoff chances were pretty much next to nothing. And they've responded well in a lot of those games. They're no strangers to must-win games so far this year. They've had a whole lot more of them than Boston has. So you may be able to catch, even though Boston's a really, really veteran team that's put a lot of teams out of the playoffs before. The Panthers have been playing desperate hockey for months now, and Boston hasn't. So maybe that gives the Panthers a bit of a slight advantage where that's concerned. And then the more you think about how a series really works, like you said, road teams have been dominant in the playoffs. Panthers go on the road. Game 5 is going to be the hardest game of this series. If you can win Game 5 on the road and stay alive, you get Game 6 back at home, where the pressure is on Boston to try to end your season there, because nobody wants to see it go to Game 7. So if you can survive Game 5, in Game 6, you're the favorite. Pressure's on Boston. If you can force a Game 7 from there, anything can happen. So I think it's just about surviving Game 5, and then you actually you really give yourself a chance after that. It may be wishful thinking, but I think if a team that's been playing desperate hockey for a month and a half now, backs against the wall this entire time, they're not strangers to that situation. Just win Game 5, and now you give yourself a really good shot. So a couple of reasons for optimism there. Not necessarily super high hopes. I still subconsciously feel like I know how this ends. A valiant effort, but there's all is not lost. And a 3-1 hole, there have been crazier things in hockey. So I think the Panthers have the talent to do it. They've got a couple of guys who can really carry you. Matthew Tkachuk can steal you a game. Sasha Barkov, when he wants to, can steal you a game. They've got the horses on the team that if they wake up, they can steal a game. A game can turn to 2 games, and 2 games can turn to a series. So it's just about win Game 5 and build from there, and we're not dead yet. So a little bit of hope. I'm not all doom and gloom yet.
Yeah, and definitely the first 10 minutes will definitely tell how long that will last. That's for sure, because the Panthers in this series, they've gone off to great starts as well. And what happens after the Panthers do, in fact, get to those early jumps? Out of 325 series in NHL history, to be at 3-1. Only 31 teams have come back to win, which is at a 9.5% in NHL history. So again, not all hope is lost. I do think that they should go back to Lyon as well. But what do I think Paul Maurice is the move that Paul Maurice makes? I wouldn't be surprised if we see Bob, just like I spoke about with Alex Dano on Monday morning when recapping Game 4. So we're going to see Bob again, regardless of whether he starts on Wednesday or not. We are going to see at least one more season of Sergei Bobrovsky in South Florida. So honestly, if anything, if you put Alex Lyon between the pipes, wouldn't that bring some more offseason training and motivation and helps Bob create a better start next season? I mean, look what happened when Spencer Knight came in Game 5 in 2021. Look what happened to Bobrovsky the season after. He was great in 2021-22. So this could actually be a good situation for the future.
Really interesting point you bring up there, because I feel like nothing lights a fire, especially when it comes to goaltending. Goalies are almost like pitchers in baseball. So much of it is mental, and nothing lights a fire under a guy than being replaced in the rotation. And truthfully, brutal honesty here, it would be a horrible look for Bobrovsky if he loses his starting job in the playoffs 2 of the last 3 seasons. Year before last, he lost it to not only Spencer Knight, but also Chris Drieger. Both guys started playoff games in place of Bobrovsky. There was a game at one point where I believe Bobrovsky was in the press box. He wasn't even the backup. That's not a good look for your $10 million goalie. And last year he rebounded. He played really well. Was even really good in the playoffs. Honestly, stole us a game or 2 against Washington. You kind of hoped he would recapture that, and now we're kind of back to square one right now. So if he doesn't start, I feel like if Lyon goes and we lose the series, that definitely motivates Bob heading into the offseason. He's got to be better. He knows he has to be better. And this next year, it's no secret to Bob. He's a veteran. He knows that it's do or die next year. It could be very well likely could be his last season in Florida if things don't go the way they need to. So maybe his last season in Florida regardless. But you'd at least like to see him go down playing great hockey, and right now that's not the case. So we'll see what happens in goal, but you don't win a game if you don't have the goaltending. So one of the two of those guys is going to have to be solid between the pipes if we're going to have any chance of coming back.
No doubt. So a lot of talk about the current and a lot of looking into the future, of course, in this episode of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And hopefully we are holding back a little bit of talking more about future and actually more talking about the immediate future. And what I mean is hoping that we have a Game 6 back in Sunrise, Florida.
But a lot of hockey to be played. Lots of hockey to be played.
No doubt. But Jacob, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Tell everybody where they can find you online.
Yep, you can find me online at Jacob Winans 8. I will definitely be active and super nervous tonight, but hopefully we can chat about a Game 6 and a Game 7 and a round 2 coming up soon. So I will see you guys there.
Awesome, Jacob, and hopefully see you next week as we are hopefully continuing the season and not talking off-season hockey. So see you next Wednesday.
Looking forward to it.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. And for the everydayers, on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, we will be breaking down Game 5 between the Florida Panthers and the Boston Bruins. Will the Florida Panthers season be over, or will the Florida Panthers season continue? So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.